Advent of English education is a very important development in modern Indian history. This development not only paved way to the introduction of Western ideas, Western thought, Western education, ideas of modernism, it also facilitated exchange of idea between the East and the West. It stimulated social reform, socio-religious reform movement, and it played a very important role in emergence of a middle class in India. English education in India was introduced gradually and it transformed over a period of time. Its first phase can be considered as the time period between 1780s to 1857, from Orientalism to Wood's Dispatch. So if I were to trace the timeline, I would say 1780s up till 1850s, or to be more clear, up till 1860. In 1780s, the first phase was characterized by Orientalism, followed by a phase of Anglicism up till 1813. 1813 till 1823 was a time period where there was evangelicalism, and in 1823 we have a very important development in the form of establishment of General Committee of Public Instruction. 1823 till 1833 is characterized by Orientalism, Orientalist versus Anglicist debate. And 1833 is characterized by the Charter Act and subsequently Macaulay Minute. And triumph of Anglicism. (1833) onwards, or this particular time period, is also the time period where we will see downward filtration theory, or let us say it is Macaulay who coined the downward filtration theory. We will understand this in detail, what is downward filtration theory. And from 1833 onwards, we will see that in 1840s, we come across Thomason's experiments with vernacular languages. And subsequently, we will see 1854, when we will have the Wood's Dispatch. And this is also known as the Magna Carta of English education in India. So the advent of English education in India, it underwent a process. Let us study this entire process in detail as to what was the necessity that drove this development and what was the effect of this particular development. We all know about the establishment of British rule and Lord Warren Hastings, or Warren Hastings becoming the first Governor General. When Warren Hastings became the Governor General, he resorted to a very pragmatic policy. He resisted attempts of Anglicists in Anglicizing Indians. Let us understand the difference between the two. Now, the British who came to India and they got political control over India initially were dependent upon Indians in administering the Indians. For example, Muhammad Reza Khan was the Naib Nazim. The English were dependent upon deputy divans for collection of revenue. So initially, the English, they aimed at learning the Indian customs, traditions, languages, because it was a foreign land. So these company servants, officials, they started learning Sanskrit. They started learning Persians. In fact, they started translating the scriptures. They started translating ancient works. And this was done with the help of Maulavis, Pandits, and Indian learned Brahmins and other intelligentsia. And this was done especially under the time period of Warren Hastings, when we see that there was establishment of Calcutta Madrasa, that was in 1780. Calcutta Madrasa was established because there was a body of literature written in Persian. We had Fatwa-e-Alamgiri, we had various texts from the Hadiths on the basis of which criminal law was administered. Therefore, in 1780, Calcutta Madrasa was formed. Then later, there was a Sanskrit college established in Banaras. So all Vedas, epics, Mahabharata, Ramayana, they were understood, translated in English. Hitopadesha, Manusmriti, Abhijnan Shakuntalam, all these were understood, translated. And then there was also Asiatic Society of Bengal. It was established in 1784 with Sir William Jones as its head. So when you are talking about the Orientalists, they aimed at learning Indian culture, Indian language, Indian tradition, Indian customs, and they had a respect for India. So prominent Orientalists, Sir William Jones, and those who spent a significant time period learning Indian language and customs and laws, they all played an important role in producing the knowledge, initial knowledge for the British to work, or for the British to understand India. So initial attempt of the English was to educate themselves into Indian culture. So they themselves learned Sanskrit and Persian rather than teaching Indians English. Now let us see the transition towards Anglicism, Anglicization. After Warren Hastings, we saw Lord Cornwallis became the Governor General. The British era was characterized by rampant corruption, maladministration, famine, oppression, exploitation. Entire Bengal was ruined by the British rule. And the British, they found an easy scapegoat in the Indian culture and Indian character. The British started claiming that the corruption, maladministration is due to poor moral and spiritual development of the Indians. They claimed that the Indian culture is corrupt. Indians are corrupt to the core, and that is why there is maladministration. And whatever distorted knowledge this Orientalism produced, this distorted knowledge created a ground for the English to claim their supremacy. Let me give you an example. During the time period of Orientalism from 1780s up till 1790, the English, they studied the Indian society in their ivory chambers by asking various Pandits, Maulavis to explain the scriptures, the text, and the English tried to understand the Indian society via that translation, via that explanation. So ancient Indian civil laws, scriptures, they were translated by people belonging to a particular religious grouping as they understood the text to be. So majority of the English, they never went into the society for themselves to have a first-hand view of what exactly was Indian social system all about. So whatever understanding they had of Indian society during the entire period of Orientalism was biased, was improper, was also incomplete. So the British, they resorted to a system of convenience. Whatever information was more convenient for the British to justify their rule, that information was upheld. And that information was used, manipulated so as to justify their rule. And whatever information was not to the utility of the British, that was discarded. So in 1790s, when Anglicization started gaining prominence, the British, they justified their superiority. They denigrated Indian character on the basis of the false information that they had gathered from Orientalism. And in Anglicist time period, they started claiming that all higher posts must be reserved for Europeans. And English supremacy was put forth by Lord Cornwallis. Lord Cornwallis said the English character was far more superior to that of Orient. He claimed that they are destined with white man burden to civilize the uncivilized. So during the Anglicist time period, there emerged certain officials, thinkers who wanted to gradually Anglicize India, or who wanted to look down upon Indians. Now, as we moved towards 1800s, we saw that throughout from 1780s till 1800s, the English officials, they had resorted to oppression and exploitation of Indians. And it's not that English were not conscious of this fact. They were conscious of this fact. Let me give you an example of Charles Grant. Charles Grant was an evangelicalist. And Charles Grant stated that English were resorting to exploitation of Indians because the English thought that their rule is temporary in India and they must fill up their pockets as much as they can. So Charles Grant used to believe that if the English officials, they are convinced or they are made to believe that the ultimate objective of English rule in India is to morally uplift India, spiritually uplift India, they will have more stakes in administering India justice properly or justiciably. In fact, that was one of the important reasons why during Charter Act of 1813, Charles Grant wanted to insert an objective that the ultimate objective of English rule in India is to uplift moral and spiritual basis of Indians. However, by 1813 there was a broad consensus The consensus was that the British, they will have to somehow educate the Indians or bring about some form of educational awareness. Up till now, what had been happening, there were certain English schools in India. They were in Calcutta, Bombay, Madras. Their objective was to educate Anglo-Indian children, the children of Englishmen in India. And we had the missionaries, the Christian missionaries, having their own schools with a different objective altogether. For they believed that the schools, they could aid in proselytizing activities, conversions. In 1813, for the first time, the British, they introduced a clause in the Charter Act of 1813. The clause that was introduced in 1813 was that, I'll just mention it here, 1813 clause stated that 1 lakh rupee fund would be set aside for advancement of literature, natives and sciences. So in the Charter Act of 1813 for the first time had this clause of a certain fund set to be set aside. This was a major development because at that point of time, public education had not yet been introduced in England also. So when Charter Act of 1813 had this clause of 1 lakh rupees to be set aside for advancement of literature, learned natives and sciences, this was the precursor towards the British introducing education in India. But here, from 1813 till 1823, there was no development based upon this particular provision. The evangelicals, they opened their convents to propagate Christian ideas along with Western learning. And it was only in 1823, in order to give effect to a section mentioned in Charter Act of 1813, that a General Committee of Public Instruction was formed. Now, the General Committee of Public Instruction was to determine whether the education that will be imparted in India would be Anglicized or Oriental, will be English or in Sanskrit Persian. Because we see already two set of distinct scholastic tradition had been established. The Orientalist tradition that had been established with efforts of Sir William Jones, with efforts of James Prinsep, with efforts of Warren Hastings, with efforts of, we can say, Charles Metcalfe. The Orientalists, they always claimed that Sanskrit or vernacular languages or Oriental languages should be the medium of public instruction. It should be either Persian or it should be Sanskrit. However, the Anglicists, they insisted that English should be the medium of public instruction. We already know that after 1813 there will be Rajaram Mohan Roy also, a modernist. He would be pitching for Western education. So the entire education scenario in India from after 1823 onwards got divided into two set of ideologies contesting one another, the Orientalists and the Anglicists. The Orientalists such as Charles Metcalfe, William Jones, James Prinsep, and Anglicists such as Thomas Macaulay and even Rajaram Mohan Roy. He would be Anglicist because he will support what? Western education, English education, the modern sciences. While this debate was carrying on from 1823 till 1833, there was another set of opinion, and it was promoted by Sir Charles Grant. Now, Sir Charles Grant, he was an evangelical, but he also supported the English education platform on the basis that only when the English, they would claim the Western ideas, Western knowledge, Western education, Western ideals to be morally, ethically superior to that of India, superior to that of Orient, the English could claim hegemony. So in order to gain cultural hegemony, there was a slight shift. That's the English they were aiming at towards Anglicism. And when Charter Act of 1833, it did away with all forms of disabilities for any individual to apply highest offices. Lord William Bentinck, he supported Lord Macaulay, who was an Anglicist, and English replaced Persian as the official language, and English replaced the Orient, or Anglicists replaced the Orients. That is, henceforth, English education was to be the basis of public education in India. So after 1833 Charter Act, we will see Macaulay, Lord Thomas Macaulay, who was a law member in William Bentinck's executive council, he would give his Macaulay minute. When Lord Macaulay, as an Anglicist, he held the Oriental learning in contempt. While addressing his minute, Lord Macaulay stated that the entire library of Arabia and India was not worth a single shelf of European books, European learning. The Anglicists aimed at projecting English literature, English sciences, English findings to be higher than that of the Orient, the East. And Lord Macaulay, at that point of time, while projecting the triumph of Anglicism, while projecting the triumph of Anglicists ideology, also promoted a downward filtration theory. So he believed that the British, they must selectively educate a class of Indians in English and let this class proliferate these English ideas to other classes, to other sections of society. This is known as a downward filtration theory. So Lord Macaulay believed that the English, they must selectively identify a class of Indians who had literate tradition, educate them in English, and this class of Indians, they would be proliferating ideas which will lead to gradual spread of English ideas, English education all over India. So Lord Macaulay, when he proposed English language, when he supported English language, English becoming the official language, supported downward filtration theory, let us understand the factors that necessitated this form of a development. English, when they introduced Charter Act in 1833, they had centralized the administration in India by a Charter Act of 1833. Now Governor General was to be Governor General of India. New territories were being annexed, were being brought under control. The English, they were required to administer larger territories now. However, the English were always dependent upon the Indians for subordinate administration. So look at the approach of Warren Hastings. Now Warren Hastings wanted to learn the language, custom and tradition of the subordinate Indians, but Lord Macaulay, he reversed that policy altogether. Now he is saying that let us have this class of subordinate administrators anglicized. Rather than English learning the language of subordinate officials, let the subordinate officials learn the language of the English. So Lord Macaulay stated that he wanted Indians who were brown in color, Indians in blood, but English in tastes. So this formed the basis towards the policy of the English to introduce English education in India. That's it. That's via Charter Act of 1833 and Macaulay Minute. Now we saw that from 1780s, there is a complete radical shift taking place by 1833. English language was to serve two purposes: create a class of internal administrators and also promote utilitarian principles, ideas, socio-cultural policies. So armed with the Anglicist ideology, Anglicist ideas, English education, the English, they resorted to certain legislations also. Abolition of thuggy, abolition of slavery, abolition of infanticide. And English, along with evangelical, utilitarian thought and Anglicist supremacy, they started interfering even in the social aspects of Indians. It was in 1840s. In the northwestern region, there was a civilian enthusiast named as Thomason. What Thomason did, Thomason started experimenting with the vernacular languages. Vernacular languages means a language that a person speaks in his day-to-day life. For example, vernacular language in the Gond region will be Gondi, or the vernacular language in the Bihar region could be Bhojpuri. So in the vernacular language, whatever is the language that is spoken and understood by people in the day-to-day life is known as vernacular language. What Thomason did, Thomason started imparting vocational and practical knowledge or practical information in the vernacular languages. And this experiment of Thomason of imparting vocational and practical knowledge in vernacular language proved to be immensely successful in northwestern region. In northwestern region, it was the decade of 1840s and 50s when Lord Dalhousie was the Governor General, that Thomason started his experiments and was immensely successful. And so much was the success that Lord Dalhousie, he decided to include vernacular language within the framework of Lord Macaulay's downward filtration theory. So in 1850s, the downward filtration theory witnessed a development and addition of Thomason's experiments with vernacular language, which formed the basis to Charles Wood's dispatch in 1854. Now when I'm talking about Wood, he was the president of Board of Control, and in 1854 he gave a dispatch on Indian education. So Wood's dispatch on Indian education is known as the Magna Carta of English education in India. So the present day system of university education or the English education, it could be traced back to 1854, Wood's dispatch, which is known as Magna Carta of English education.